Continue talking about CSS animation, and in the last one we made kind of a rotating square, and in this one I thought I'd make it a little more interesting. Here I've got the square rotating on the y-axis. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, let's talk about it, right? So I'm going to delete everything that I have here, and we'll start over again. Let me actually just delete all this stuff, right? Okay, so I started with a div and I gave it the class name box. You could use any class name, and then I put another div inside. So the outer div is the red square and the inner div is this kind of tan circle, and I put EM in there just so we could see something. Maybe this will be part of my website dedicated to the key of E minor, which deserves its own website, right? So let's get started, right? So far, you know, I have this and it really doesn't look like much. So what we'll do is we'll give box a width of 100 pixels, a height of 100 pixels, and you can use, you know, any numbers, right? I'm just picking a couple numbers that'll be convenient, right? And easy to calculate, right? And then we'll give it a background color of our favorite shade of red, tomato. And then what else do we need? Let's give it a position of relative, right? And we'll use this because we'll use absolute position to position the other. Actually, you know what? Maybe we won't. Maybe I'll do it differently. I used absolute position on the example, but actually maybe we'll use flexbox. Let's do that. How about display flex? You know, a lot of times I'm using absolute position with the animation, but in this case, the inner box really doesn't animate, so so we might as well just align it with flex, right? And then we'll do justify content center and align items center. Okay, and so far, you know, we have this, and then our EM is in the middle. So let's style the EM. So I'll say, you know, box child div, and we'll give the div a width of 80 pixels and a height of 80. And again, the numbers are kind of arbitrary, right? You can decide for your own needs, right? And we'll give it a background color of, I'm going to choose this wheat color, right? And then let's give it a border radius of 50%. Okay, so that's kind of good. I got the circle in the middle, but the EM now is not in the center. And there's a couple ways we can handle that. I think I'm going to do it this way. Let's do text align. Actually, I wonder if we could flex it again. I'll just do it this way. We'll do text align center, and then we'll do line height of 80 pixels, right? So that should put us in the center vertically. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad. Maybe we should set the font size a little bit larger too. So we'll do font size of 22 pixels. And that looks pretty good, right? Okay, great. So how are we going to do the animation? Maybe let's give this box up here, let's push it out from the edges a little bit and give it some margin of maybe 2 rems. There we go, that looks pretty good. So now we're going to do the animation. So we're going to use keyframes again. So I'll start with keyframes with an @keyframe block. I'll use the same identifier I used last time of spin. I'll set the starting rotation to, or the starting keyframe at the beginning of the animation to 0%, and I'll set the transform rotate. And in this case, I'm going to choose rotate Y. Okay? So the Y-axis is the vertical axis. And imagine there was a piece of string running through the center of this, vertically through the center of the box here, and the box was hanging from the string. That would be the y-axis, and if you spun the box, it would rotate around like this, right? So let's start at a rotation of 0, and then we'll set at 100% of the rotation, we'll do a transform of rotate Y, and we'll set it to 360 degrees. Now, this will work, but it needs a little something more, right? And we'll do is let's apply the animation first. So I've got my keyframes set up, and now I want to apply this animation to, not to the inner box, but to the outer box. So we'll apply it up here. So we'll say animation name is spin, so that refers to this block of keyframes. And then we'll say animation duration is 5,000 milliseconds, and animation iteration count, like how many times do we want to spin? Let's just spin forever. So we'll set the iteration count to infinite, right? And let's give it a try, right? So I'll do this. And that looks pretty good, except it's kind of speeding up and slowing down, like it rotates once and then it stops, right? So we want to set the timing function. So we'll say animation timing function, right? And we'll set the timing function to linear, right? So that'll, oops, I got the Mozilla version here. We'll just do it this way. Okay, so now it should rotate smoothly at a constant rate, like linear means a constant rate. Now I'm kind of lacking in the perspective, right? It doesn't really, it kind of looks flat. It looks more like it's scaling inward and then scaling outward. So in order to get the perspective applied here, I need to apply some perspective to this element. So what I'll do is I'll go to my transform here, and I'll set, let me actually do it this way, perspective, right? And the value that you put in perspective is the distance from the camera to the picture plane, right? So, you know, if you're driving in a car and you're looking at the mountains and you see them move, or you see the mountains move slower than the signs or the buildings at the edge of the road, imagine like the window in the car as the picture plane, right? And then how far objects are away from that picture plane is kind of like the perspective value. Or you can imagine like looking at the computer screen and watching some movie or something. The distance up from your eye from the picture plane maybe is kind of simulating the same perspective property. It's hard to describe in words. I'll just try it, right? So I'm going to put 400 pixels here. And I'll just copy this. This value we're not going to change. We're just going to leave it the same, right? And let's look. Oh, great. Now we got some perspective. So you can see as the corner here moves around, it gets wider and then it gets smaller as it goes back in space. And if we change the perspective here, like if I say 4,000, right, that'll decrease the amount of perspective that we see, right? But if I make the number smaller, like I make it 40, that'll, you know, increase the extremity of the perspective effect. Wow, that's a little too strong, right? So anyway, so there's our three-dimensional. Maybe if I do 200, that'll be a little less extreme, right? Yeah, that looks pretty good, right? Maybe it's a little too much, right? But anyway, you can play with these numbers and see what you come up with, right? But that's our 3D example, okay? So remember, that's the y-axis running through the middle, and the object is spinning around on it. If we change this to, let's say, the x-axis, like this, now we can see it's flipping over the x-axis that runs along horizontally, right? And last, if we use the z-axis, this is like what you would picture for regular rotation. And the z-axis is kind of like, imagine that the axis is running into the screen. Imagine you have a pin, like pinning this object to the screen here, and it's spinning around the point of the pin, right? Okay, so anyway, hopefully that's interesting and inspires some great animations. Thanks for watching.